The ink pot tipped without a sound. Faded jonquil muslin drank the black stain like a wound. Hester Pelham did not flinch. She set the tea tray down on the sideboard at Alnwick Hall, dropped to one knee on the cold parquet, and blotted the spreading ink with the corner of her own apron. Above her, Augusta Verney, the Dowager Duchess of Alnwick, closed a leather ledger with a soft, deliberate snap. "I know which books you have been reading, girl," the Dowager said. "Every one of them." Hester rose. She said nothing. Under her stained skirt, folded small against her thigh, was a torn scrap of paper she had lifted from the library grate that morning. 7 words in a faded hand. Fintan O'Hare, Gretna, 1789. 3 rooms away. A carriage door slammed in the drive. Ralph Verney, 9th Duke of Alnwick, stepped down from the London road unannounced, a solicitor's note crushed in his gloved fist. He crossed his own marble hall without removing his greatcoat, walked straight to the library, and opened the banking ledger to the last entry. 40% of the ordinary shares of the Alnwick Bank had been signed over to his brother Clarence, 6 days ago. In his own forged hand. He looked up. Hester was standing in the doorway, an ink-stained rag still curled in her fingers. Storm-gray eyes met Hazel across 20 feet of Aubusson carpet. "Have you seen this page, Miss Pelham?" "I have seen every page in this room, Your Grace." Neither of them knew yet what she had folded against her skirt. Neither of them knew what the Dowager had already set in motion in Grosvenor Square. Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. October 1817 had come to Alnwick Hall with a wet, colorless patience, and Hester Pelham was climbing the servants' stair in her stockinged feet, a Japan tray balanced against her hip. She carried a china cup of bohea, a saucer, a small silver spoon, and 1 biscuit that Mrs. Brackley had pressed on her at the kitchen door, with a look that said, "You shall need it before the hour is out." The cup rattled faintly against the saucer at each step. Hester steadied it with the flat of her palm and went on. The old rushes on the back stair had been swept away in the last audit and never replaced. Bare oak now, warped at the edges. The candle sconces along the passage were empty of tapers except at the very top, where a single stump guttered in a draught that came from nowhere in particular. Alnwick Hall had 140 rooms. 22 were now in use. The rest were closed with dust sheets and vinegar-soaked rags at the door hinges, as though the house itself had been laid out for a very slow burial. Hester had come to the hall in the 2nd week of the morning, brought from her aunt's small house in Berwick by the Dowager's carriage, engaged, so the letter had said, as companion. She had been told her duties would be gentle, to read to Lady May, whose rheumatic fever had left her fingers bent as pins, to write letters for her Grace, to be present, quietly, when the Dowager wished someone present. She was 23 years old. Her whole wardrobe traveled in one Japan trunk with a broken lock. In it, folded between 2 sheets of tissue, lay her mother's last letter, and, wrapped in that letter, a fragment of paper torn from the corner of a marriage register in a village at the border of Scotland. She had not come to Alnwick Hall to be a companion. That she now knew. At the top of the stair she paused, listening. The morning-room door stood open 2 fingers. Beyond it she heard the small, dry click of a fan being folded once, twice, and set upon a table. She squared her shoulders. She pushed the door with the tip of her elbow. "Your Grace, your tea." Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Alnwick, did not turn her head. She sat at her writing desk in a shaft of gray window light, black wool sleeves shining faintly with the polish of long wear, the onyx cameo at her throat cutting a small round shadow on her collarbone. Her white hair had been dressed high that morning, the silver comb set with garnets driven in like a signal at the crown. Her lorganon lay on the desk beside a bound ledger and a fresh pot of ink. "Set it here." Hester crossed the carpet, careful of the frayed edge, and lowered the tray to the writing desk. The cup steadied. She began to withdraw her hand. Augusta lifted the ink pot as though to move it out of Hester's way. The gesture was neat, unhurried, and beautifully judged. The pot tipped in her fingers. A tongue of black ink slid over the desk, ran the length of the ledger's beveled edge, dropped, and unfurled slowly across the faded jonquil of Hester's skirt, from waist to hem. Hester did not step back. She did not gasp. She looked down once at the black creeping through the yellow muslin, and then at the Dowager's face. "How careless of me," Augusta said. "It seems your gown is beyond saving." It seems so, your grace. You have another. I have another, your grace. Then you shall wear it. Sit. Hester sat on the small cane-backed chair placed for petitioners at the corner of the desk. Beneath the ruined skirt, her right hand pressed, quiet as a mouse, against the lining of her pocket, where a folded square of paper lay against her thigh. She did not look at the pocket. She looked at the dowager. Augusta unfolded a slip of blotting paper and lifted a book from the pile at her elbow. She set the book upon the blotter with the small ceremony of a magistrate laying down a warrant. Hester saw the spine. It was a slim volume of sermons by Bishop Porteus, entirely dull, quite pious, and, 3 weeks ago, lifted from the library shelf by Hester's own hand, on the pretext of reading aloud to Lady May. "You are fond of reading, I understand," Augusta said. "I read to Lady May, your grace. You read a great deal beyond Lady May." The dowager turned a page with one gloved finger. The glove was black police leather and made no sound. Sermons. Interesting choice. And the Almanac of the Alnwick Estates for the year 91, and the Register of Tenants for Northumberland in the same, and the correspondence of the 8th Duke with a Mr. Adair of Gretna. That was interesting, was it not? She raised her eyes. They were the pale blue of a January sky over a burnt field. "I have had the shelves watched," she said, "since Michaelmas. Every book you have taken down, every drawer you have opened, every letter you have unfolded and folded again, as though carefully. I know what your hands have touched, Miss Pelham. I have a list." Hester's fingers, hidden under the black-soaked muslin, closed slowly upon the paper in her pocket. "Fintan O'Hare," it said, in the crabbed hand of a Scots curate, "Gretna, June the 9th, 1789. I read to pass the time, your grace. Then you shall pass it another way." Augusta set down the book. She poured cream into her tea from the pitcher Hester had brought, stirred it once, and drank without looking up. "You will not enter the library again. You will not walk in the West Gallery. You will bring your candle each night to Mrs. Brackley and account for its stub in the morning. You will write no letters that Mrs. Brackley does not first read. You will speak to Lady May only in this room and only in my presence. Do you understand me, Miss Pelham?" "I understand, your grace. You are here because I permit it. You are here on my sufferance, and on the good name of an aunt in Berwick who trusted her only niece to the hospitality of this house. If she knew you had abused that trust, I do not think she would sleep well. No, your grace. There is no need to weep. I shall not weep, your grace." Augusta looked at her fully then. Something passed behind the pale blue eyes, considered, and withdrew. "No," she said. "I see that. It is a pity. Tears would have made this easier for us both." She lifted a small brass bell and rang it once. Mrs. Brackley appeared at the door, with such promptness that she had plainly been standing outside it. "Miss Pelham has had an accident with her gown," Augusta said. "Take her to change, and bring her back with her sewing box. She shall sit with me this morning. There is a great deal of mending in the linen chest that has been neglected." "Yes, your grace." Hester rose. She curtsied. The curtsy lasted the exact length of a breath, no more. The sort of courtesy given to a magistrate in his own courtroom by a woman who does not yet know whether she is a witness or the accused. She followed Mrs. Brackley into the passage, and the door clicked to behind them. Mrs. Brackley did not speak until they were 3 doors down. At the turn of the passage she stopped, looked back once at the closed morning-room door, and crossed herself with the small business-like gesture of a woman who had done it in barns and lying in rooms and beside the dying for 40 years. "Come away, child. Come away quick. I am not weeping. No. That is what worries me." They went down the narrow east stair to the second landing, where Hester had a small room over the linen press that smelled of dried lavender and damp. Mrs. Brackley shut the door with her back to it. Hester unhooked the ruined gown and let it fall in a black and yellow heap upon the boards. She lifted the folded square from the pocket, held it a moment in her palm, and slipped it between the leaves of her mother's letter at the bottom of the trunk. "You have another gown," Mrs. Brackley said. "I have the gray. Wear the gray. Gray is honest cloth. And listen to me now, miss." The housekeeper crossed the room in 3 short steps and took Hester's wrist between her thumb and forefinger. Her grip was that of a woman who had wrung the necks of chickens for 40 years. "She did not spill that ink. No, she will do worse." "Yes. Then why do you not go home, child? There is a coach at Alnwick Village at 3. Your aunt would take you in tomorrow night." Hester drew the gray stuff gown over her chemise. It was 3 winters old. The collar had been turned once already. She fastened the small pearl button at the throat with fingers that did not quite tremble, and then did, and then stopped. "I cannot go home yet, Mrs. Brackley." "Because of what?" Hester looked at her. The housekeeper's brown eyes were older than the hall, older than the dowager, older than the road outside. "Because I have not finished looking," Hester said. Mrs. Brackley let out her breath slowly. "God help you, child. God help us both." She fetched the sewing box from the shelf, placed it in Hester's arms, and opened the door. "There is one thing," Hester said, at the threshold. "The 8th Duke's papers. They were sent from London last month, were they not?" "Aye. 2 chests. Locked. His Grace has not sent for them." "Where are they kept?" "In the muniment room, under the north stair. Her Grace has the key on her chatelaine, and Mr. Methuen has the other." Mrs. Brackley looked at her steadily. "Miss, do not." "I shall not, Mrs. Brackley. Today." She went back up the stair with the sewing box under her arm and her needle in her hand before she was through the door of the morning room. She sat where she had been told to sit. She threaded her needle by the gray window light. She began to hem a torn tablecloth of Irish damask with stitches so small and so even that after 10 minutes the dowager laid down her pen and watched her over the top of the Lord Gnome with an expression that was almost, but not quite, respect. They worked in silence until the bell for luncheon. The rain had begun again outside, striking the tall windows in long slantwise runs. Somewhere in the house a door was opened and closed, and a draught passed through the passage and stirred the black hem of Augusta's sleeve. At noon Mrs. Brackley came to the door with a tray for her mistress, and a curtsy for Hester, and the news that a horse had come up the drive in the wet. "A horse, Brackley?" "Aye, your Grace. A dispatch rider from London. He asks for the steward." "There is no steward." "He asks then for your Grace." Augusta set down her fork upon a slice of cold mutton she had not touched. Her pale eyes narrowed a fraction of a hair. "Send him to the small parlor. And you, Miss Pelham, you will stay here and finish the tablecloth." "Yes, your Grace." Augusta rose. She smoothed her black skirts once with the flat of her gloved hand. Then she went out, the keys on her chatelaine chiming faintly against the folds of her gown, and left the door pointedly wide. Hester bent her head over the damask. The rain ran on the windows. Under the small chair her stockinged foot pressed once, quietly, upon the floorboard beneath which she had, 3 nights before, worked loose a nail. She had not put anything under it yet. She was only marking the place. She sewed on, 12 stitches to the inch, even as the ticking of the black lacquer clock upon the chimney-piece. She did not look up when the door of the small parlor opened at the far end of the long corridor. She did not look up when a man's voice, low, unfamiliar, saluted the dowager in the tone of a servant to a magistrate. She did not look up when the dowager's own voice answered in 3 short syllables and the door closed again. She only counted, in her head, the strokes of the clock and the length of the pause between the door closing and the boots on the flagstones going out, and she marked them, silently, as one marks the price of a thing one intends to remember. The dispatch rider was gone by 2. Mrs. Brackley came back to the morning room with a face that had gone smooth as new butter, and told Hester that her Grace begged she should sew in her own chamber that afternoon, as her Grace had a letter to write and required quiet. Hester curtsied, and took her needle and her tablecloth and went, but she did not go to her own chamber. She went down the servants' stair to the pantry passage, and along the pantry passage to the little door behind the cold larder, and out into the wet stone yard, and across the yard in the rain without a cloak, until she stood at the corner of the stable and could see the lower drive. The dispatch rider had not gone alone. 2 of the yard boys were leading a saddled hunter out of the stable, and Wilkes, the head groom, was tightening a girth on a second. In the yard by the mounting block stood a black traveling coach, with the Alnwick arms half painted out on the door, a torch and 3 ravens still just visible beneath the mud. The coachman was climbing to his box. Someone had summoned the Duke. Someone in this house had sent a rider to London in the night, and someone at the other end had put a coach on the road at first light, and by tomorrow evening, Ralph Verney, Duke of Alnwick, would come up his own drive for the first time in 22 months. Hester stood with the rain running down her collar and her breath making a small warm cloud in the cold, and she felt, quite suddenly, as though a hand she had not known was on her throat had let go by half an inch. She did not smile. She did not weep. She turned back to the little door behind the cold larder, and she went in, and she climbed the servants' stair to her chamber, and she took her mother's letter from the bottom of her trunk, and she took the folded square from between its leaves, and she read the crabbed Scots hand once more by the last of the grey window light. Fintan O'Hare, Gretna. June the 9th, 1789. A witness, a place, a date. 28 years old, and still, when held to the lamp, quite legible. She folded it again. She put it back between the pages. She closed the trunk. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed in the gray stuff gown with the turned collar, and she waited for tomorrow. Below her, in the morning room, Augusta had taken up her pen and was writing, in the same neat hand with which she had watched the ink run across a girl's skirt at 10 o'clock, a letter of 9 sentences to a gentleman in Lombard Street. What she did not know, as she sanded and folded and sealed it with black wax, was that her own solicitor of 31 years, Mr. Edmund Methuen, had already written a very different letter the night before, and that it had reached a house in St. James's at 6:30 that morning, and had been opened and read again by a man who had not spoken his dead wife's name aloud in 22 months. Outside, the rain thickened. Somewhere on the North Road, a hunter changed hands at a coaching inn, and a black coach with a half-painted crest rolled south through the wet toward London. By tomorrow evening, it would be coming back. The black coach came back through Alnwick village a little after dusk on the second evening, its wheels dark with London mud, its lamps burning against a low ceiling of rain. No outrider had gone ahead to announce it. No footman waited at the gates. The gatekeeper, half asleep in his cottage, only recognized the tired hunter at the traces, because the animal turned toward his own stall without being asked. Inside the hall, the news traveled faster than any bell. Mrs. Brackley found Hester on the servants' stair, with a coal scuttle in her hand, and no shoes on her feet again. His Grace is on the drive, the housekeeper said, low, alone, no valet. He wants no announcement. Hester set the scuttle down against the wall. Coal dust marked her palm, and she wiped it on her apron without thinking. Does Her Grace the Dowager know? Not yet. Keep it that way as long as you can. Mrs. Brackley's mouth tightened in something that was not quite a smile. She had served 3 dukes in this house, and she knew when a woman half her age was giving a sound order. She nodded once and went. Hester climbed the back stairs 2 at a time. She did not go to her own room. She went to the library. The library at Alnwick Hall ran the length of the east wing, 3 tall windows sealed by heavy shutters against the weather, a long oak table down the center, and along the north wall a locked press where the estate ledgers lived. The room had been shut since spring. Dust lay on the reading candles in a fine gray film. Hester lit 2 of them from the coals on the grate. She did not open the ledger press. She only knelt at the hearth, coaxed the fire back to life, and drew the great leather chair a little closer to the warmth so the seat would not be cold when he sat in it. Then she took the shutter down from the middle window. Rain crawled sideways across the glass. Beyond it, a lantern was climbing the drive. She stepped back into the shadow of the bookshelves and waited. The door opened without a knock. Ralph Verney, 9th Duke of Alnwick, came in on the smell of wet wool and horse and the North Road, his greatcoat still on his shoulders and dark to the hem, his boots ringing on the parquet. He was carrying a small locked dispatch box under one arm. His morning cravat was crooked. He had not slept. He stopped when he saw her. Hester curtsied. Your Grace. You lit the fire. Yes. Why the library and not the drawing room? Because you would come here first. He looked at her for a moment longer than was polite. Then he set the dispatch box on the oak table, hard enough that the candles jumped. Bring me the current ledger of the Alnwick banking house, he said. Ordinary share register, quarter to Michaelmas. It is in the North Press. The press is locked, Your Grace. Mrs. Brackley has the key. Mrs. Brackley has a key. Her Grace the Dowager has another. He looked at her again. This time there was something new behind his eyes, quick and cold as a struck match. Then go to Brackley. Not to my mother. Hester left without a word. By the time she came back with the housekeeper and the ledger, the greatcoat was over the back of the chair, and the Duke was already at the table with a lamp pulled close, his sleeves turned back once at the wrist. The signet ring on his left hand caught the lamp yellow and steady, Torre and 3 ravens. He did not look up when she set the great book down at his elbow. Anonymous letter, he said, as if to the ledger. London, Tuesday, unfranked. Addressed in a solicitor's hand I have known for 20 years. He did not name Methuen. He did not need to. Mrs. Brackley withdrew to the door and stood with her hands folded, watching neither of them. Ralph turned the pages backward. Michaelmas, Midsummer, Lady Day. He was looking for the last quarter he had signed in person, before the funeral, before the black armband and the year of half-attention that had followed it. His finger moved down the columns without hurry. He had been trained to this since he was 15. The Alnwick fortune had never been in land alone. The bank in Lombard Street was the spine of it, and the ordinary shares of that bank were the spine of the spine. 60% had come to him with the title. 40 had gone in trust for Lady May. His hand stopped. He read the entry once. He read it again, then, very quietly, he closed the ledger on his own finger to keep the place, and lifted his head. Mrs. Brackley, Your Grace. Who has been in this room? Her Grace the Dowager. 3 days ago. Mr. Wilbraham was received in the small parlor Tuesday, but he did not come upstairs. Lord Clarence has not been in the house since Lammas. Any express riders from London? One on Monday. For Her Grace. He nodded once. He did not thank her. He said, "That will be all," and Mrs. Brackley curtsied and went. The library door shut. The rain doubled against the shutters. Hester had not moved. She stood at the corner of the table with her hands laced in front of her apron, and she was looking at the same page he had closed his finger on, though she could only see the edge of it. Ralph opened the book again. He turned it toward her. Miss Pelham. The formal name was deliberate. She heard it. Your Grace. Have you seen this page? The column was neat. The clerk's hand was one she knew. Under the date of the 10th of October, the week before, the week she had been carrying trays up dark stairs and a scrap of paper against her thigh, 40% of the ordinary shares of the Alnwick banking house stood transferred from the trust of Lady May Verney into the sole name of Lord Clarence Verney. Signatory of consent for the trustee, Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Alnwick. Counter-signatory, J. Wilbraham, Captain, late of His Majesty's 34th foot. Hester did not lean closer. She did not need to. I have seen every page in this room, Your Grace. Her voice was low and level. I read for Lady May in the afternoons. When she sleeps, I put the books back myself. Every page, including this one, including that one. He waited. I read it the morning after it was entered, she said. I did not know who to tell. Something in his shoulders went down half an inch. It was the closest thing to relief that his body had allowed itself in a year. Sit down, he said. Your Grace, Sit down, Miss Pelham. You will not read to me standing. She sat. The great chair he had drawn to the fire was for him. There was a smaller chair by the table, its cane seat mended twice. She took that one and folded her stained hands in her lap. Ralph turned the pages back a further quarter, and then a further one. He did not speak for some minutes. The signet ring tapped once against the oak, softly, in a rhythm she recognized from her own thinking, the rhythm of a mind counting backward through months. At last he said, "Read me the entry for the 3rd of August, aloud." She read it. Her voice did not shake. She had a good reader's voice, plain, unhurried, faintly north country under the polish, and she read numbers the way other women read scripture, without flourish and without doubt. Again, he said, when she had finished. Slower, from the marginal note. She read it again. He listened with his eyes closed. You know what you are reading, he said, still without opening them. I know that on the 3rd of August, Lady May's trust held 67% of the bank. I know that on the 10th of October, it holds 27. I know that Lord Clarence held nothing on either date except a debt to a Mr. Solomon of St. James's Street for 600 guineas. The eyes opened. How do you know about the debt? Because Mr. Solomon wrote to the Dowager on the 15th of September. The letter was left in the morning room. I put it back. There was a small, dangerous silence. Miss Pelham, you have been useful to me in ways I did not know how to ask for. She looked at the fire, not at him. I have been in this house 11 months, Your Grace. I know how long you have been in this house. She turned her head then. The lamplight caught her hazel eyes clean, and for the first time since he had come into the room the two of them looked at each other as equals across a table, and not as a duke and a poor cousin. Miss Pelham. He did not soften his voice. He did not need to. What else have you seen? She told him. She told him about the letter from Solomon and the debt. She told him about the second letter, from a solicitor in Chancery Lane whose name she did not recognize, addressed to the Dowager, and beginning, Madam, the certificate you require has been located in the parish register of Gretna Green under the year 1789. She told him about a folded slip in his mother's writing desk that had 2 lists on it, one of names and one of sums, and how she had only seen the top of the paper before she had put it back. She told him, without embellishment, about Captain Wilbraham coming 3 times to the small parlor in 5 weeks. and how he never removed his saber when he sat, and how on the last visit, the dowager had walked him out to his horse in the rain herself. Ralph listened without interrupting. When she had finished, he said, "You wrote none of this down." "No, your grace." "Why?" "Because I had no key to any drawer in this house that would hold it." He nodded slowly. "You do now." He drew a small brass key from his waistcoat pocket and set it on the ledger between them. It was the key to the North Press. He did not push it toward her. He only put it there. "From tonight," he said, "you are my reader. Not the dowager's, not Lady May's alone, mine. You will read to me in this room after dinner. You will read what I set before you, and you will read what you have seen and not been asked about. Your salary will be paid from my private account, not from the household. Your aunt in Kirkby Stephen will receive a quarterly annuity of £40 beginning at Christmas." Hester did not touch the key. "Your grace." "Miss Pelham, I am not a transaction." He looked at her. He did not smile. He had not smiled in 22 months, and he did not smile now. But something in the corner of his mouth admitted her. "No," he said, "you are a witness. I am asking you to remain one and to be paid for the risk of it. If you accept, I will lodge a codicil with Methuen tomorrow, protecting your name and your character from any accusation my mother, my brother, or Captain Wilbraham may bring against you in this county or in London. If you refuse, I will have Brackley put you on the mail coach north at dawn with a character letter in my own hand and a purse enough to keep you 3 years, and you will never see this house again." The fire cracked. A log fell. Hester looked at the brass key. She looked at the ledger. She looked, last, at the ring on his left hand, at the torre and the 3 ravens worn shallow by 4 generations of use. She put her fingers on the key. "I accept, your grace." He held out his right hand across the table. Bare. No glove. She took it. His hand was cold from the coach and hers was warm from the fire, and for the length of one held breath the library was very quiet. Then he let go, and she folded her hands again in her lap, and neither of them spoke of it. Ralph reached for his pen. He wrote a single line at the foot of the ledger page, initialed it, and blotted it. Then he lifted his head, as if remembering something from a great distance away. "There is one more thing, Miss Pelham, your grace. My wife's name was Isolde. She had known that. Every soul in the county had known that. But he had not said it aloud in 22 months, and Mrs. Brackley, listening at the far side of the library door with her hand on the panel because she was 61 years old and not above it, heard him say it now, and closed her eyes. "Gisolde," Hester repeated, softly, giving the name back to him whole. He nodded once. Then he opened the dispatch box he had brought from London and drew from it a sealed letter with a heavy black wax seal she recognized at once, the seal of Methuen's firm in Lombard Street, and laid it beside the ledger. "Tomorrow," he said, "we ride to London. You, myself, and Brackley for propriety. Methuen has a strong box in the cellar of the bank that was sealed in the year of my birth. He has written to me that it must be opened in my presence, and that what is in it will decide whether I am the 9th Duke of Alnwick at all." Hester's hand tightened once on the arm of the chair, and then loosened. "At what hour, your grace?" 6. "I shall be ready at 5. He looked at her a long moment, then he took up the ledger, closed it, locked it back into the North Press with the brass key she had just accepted, and gave the key back into her hand. "Good night, Miss Pelham." "Good night, your grace." She rose. She curtsied. She walked to the door with her back straight and the brass key closed inside her palm, and she did not let herself breathe out until she was on the far side of it, in the dark of the corridor, with the rain still working at the shutters behind her. At the head of the great stair, a candle burned that had not been burning an hour before. Augusta, Dowager Duchess of Alnwick, stood beneath it in her black wool and her onyx cameo, her white hair coiled high, her lorgnon lifted, her ice-blue eyes traveling once down Hester's coal-marked apron and once up to the closed hand at her side. "You are up late, Miss Pelham." Hester curtsied. She held the curtsy a beat longer than was necessary, so that when she rose, her voice would be steady. "Her Grace the Dowager is up later." Augusta's mouth did not move. Only the lorgnon lowered, slowly, back to its gold chain. "My son is home." "Yes, your grace." He did not send word. "No, your grace." "Tell me, child, whose fire did you light in the library tonight?" Hester did not lower her eyes. She did not raise them either. She met the old woman at exactly the height of the onyx cameo at her throat. "His Grace's, your grace." For a heartbeat, in the candlelight at the top of the stair, The Dowager Duchess of Alnwick understood that something had shifted in her house that she had not authorized and could not, tonight, undo. Her nostrils narrowed by the width of a hair. It was the only sign. "Go to bed, Miss Pelham." "Yes, Your Grace." Hester went. She did not look back, and behind her, on the landing, Augusta stood a long moment more in the dark, her hand closing very slowly on the head of her cane, while somewhere below, in the sealed library, the 9th Duke of Alnwick sat alone by his own fire, and, for the first time in almost 2 years, began to write a letter that was not an apology. The letter was 3 lines long when the candle guttered, and Ralph did not relight it. He set the pen down, folded the paper once, and pressed the crease flat with the flat of his thumb. Then he sat very still and listened to the house. Somewhere above, a floorboard sighed. Somewhere below, a clock struck the quarter. Between those 2 small sounds lay every corridor of Alnwick Hall, and in one of them slept a woman who had read every page of the ledger before he had. He rose. He crossed the library in his stockinged feet, because boots on marble at 3 in the morning were the surest way to wake a dowager duchess. At the great inlaid desk he unlocked the drawer with the small brass key he wore at his fob, drew out a fresh sheet of foolscap, and began to draft, in the plain hand he used for banking matters, a contract of employment. Reader of accounts to His Grace the Duke of Alnwick. Salary, £120 per annum. Board and lodging retained. Pension of £40 per annum settled upon Miss Prudence Pelham of Bath, aunt to the aforesaid, for the term of her natural life. Duration, at the pleasure of either party. He read it over once. He struck out 120 and wrote 180. Then he sealed it with wax the color of dried blood and pressed the Tower and 3 ravens of the signet ring into it, while the wax was still soft enough to remember him. At 7:30, when Mrs. Brackley brought the shaving water, Ralph was already dressed. He handed her the sealed paper without preamble. "Miss Pelham," he said, "before she takes down the linens. In the small library, alone." Mrs. Brackley's face did not move. 61 years of service had taught her not to let a face move. She said, "Yes, Your Grace," and she carried the sealed paper into the corridor, as if it were a hot coal she had been told, on pain of dismissal, not to drop. Hester was on her knees in the linen press when the housekeeper found her. Her sleeves were pushed to the elbow. There was a smear of ink on her left wrist from the fragment she had rewritten 3 times in the night and burned in the wash-house grate before dawn. Mrs. Brackley did not speak. She only held the letter out and waited. Hester wiped her hands on her apron. She took the seal in her fingers and turned it once towards the light. The Tower and the 3 ravens. She had seen that impression 6 times in the last 3 weeks, always on documents Augusta had opened first and resealed with a candle stub. "Where?" "Small library, miss." Now, Hester did not run. She untied the apron, folded it once, laid it upon the shelf, and walked. In the corridor she passed a housemaid polishing the balusters and did not look at her. She had learned, in 22 months at Alnwick Hall, that a maid who looked at another servant while carrying an unopened letter from the Duke would be gossiped into ruin by evening. The small library was where the 9th Duke of Alnwick did the work he did not wish his mother to see. It had no window that faced the drive. The one door had a lock that answered to a key he carried on his person. When Hester stepped inside, Ralph was standing at the far end of the room with his back to the fire and his hands clasped behind him, and the great ledger from the night before lay open on the reading table between them. "Close the door." She closed it. "Lock it." She looked at him. "The key is in the lock," he said. "Turn it. I do not wish to be interrupted, and I do not wish you to feel, at any moment during this conversation, that you cannot leave." She turned the key. Then she laid it upon the table where he could see it, and where she could reach it faster than he could. Something in his mouth moved that was almost a smile. "Read it," he said, and nodded at the sealed paper still in her hand. She broke the seal. She read the 3 paragraphs standing. When she reached the pension for Aunt Prudence, her hand tightened on the paper, and Ralph, who had been watching her wrist and not her face, saw the small white place where her thumb pressed. She did not look up at once. She read it a second time, then she set the paper down beside the key. "Why?" "Because last night I opened a ledger and found that 40% of the common stock of my bank had walked out of my house on paper I did not sign. Because I had been in that library for 3 hours before I understood what I was reading, and you had understood it in 3 minutes on a landing in the dark. Because a man who cannot read his own house needs eyes, and yours are already in the rooms mine cannot enter. And my title, your grace? He inclined his head. Your title is what my mother has been using to keep you here without paying you. That ends this morning. You will be paid. You will be housed. Your aunt will have bread that does not depend on the goodwill of a woman who has none. In return, you will read, for me, the accounts my mother lays before me, and you will tell me what she has taken out of them before I see them. Hester was quiet for a long moment. In the grate, a log settled and threw a small handful of sparks against the fire screen. You are asking me, she said, to spy upon your mother in her own house. I am asking you to do what you have already been doing, he said, with the door of the linen press half open, for 22 months, for nothing. I am asking you to do it now with a lock on the door and a salary in the bank and a pension for your aunt, and my word that when the thing is done, whatever it costs, your name will leave this house cleaner than it entered it. She did not sit down. He had not offered a chair, and she understood, without being told, that this was a courtesy. A seated woman in a locked room with a duke was a woman whose reputation had already been drafted for her. Standing, she was still a servant reading a letter. Standing, she could still walk out. There is a clause missing, she said. Name it. If your mother discovers this before you have done what you mean to do, she will not dismiss me. She will accuse me of theft, of your bed, of both. The magistrate at Alnwick has taken tea in her drawing room every Tuesday for 11 years. I will be in the county jail by nightfall, and Aunt Prudence will be in the workhouse by the end of the quarter, pension or no pension. Yes. Then the clause is this. If she moves first, the pension pays out at once and in full, to my aunt directly, from a solicitor she cannot reach. Not from the estate, not from the bank. From a man in London whose name she does not know. Ralph considered her. His mouth did that thing again that was almost a smile, and was in fact something closer to recognition. Methuen, he said. Edmund Methuen, Lincoln's Inn. He drew the letter you are holding. He will draw the deed of settlement this afternoon. Your aunt's £40 will be lodged in the funds by Friday, and drawn against an account she alone may sign upon. If I am ruined tomorrow, it pays her still. If I am dead, the trustees are Methuen, and a partner of his choosing, whom my mother has never met and will never meet. Then we have a bargain. Not yet. He came round the table then. He did not come close. He stopped an arm's length from her, on the other side of the reading stand, and he laid his right hand flat upon the ledger between them, palm down, the signet ring turned up so she might see the tower and the 3 ravens. Give me your hand, Miss Pelham. She looked at the ring. She looked at his face. Then she laid her hand across his, palm to palm, and she did not tremble, though her fingers were a shade too cold for the room. He did not close his grip. He held her hand as one holds a document one has been told is fragile and is not. On this, he said, and not on paper, because paper my mother can find. Your eyes in these rooms, my name over yours, until the thing is done. Until the thing is done, your grace. He was silent a moment, then, quite low, so that afterwards she was not entirely certain she had heard it, he said, Isolde would have liked you. It was the first time in 22 months the name had been spoken aloud in that house. Hester heard it. She did not answer it. She understood that it had not been said to her, precisely. It had been said past her, into the room, at the fire, at the ledger, at whatever it was in him that had been sealed shut since the last time he had held a woman's hand across a table. He released her fingers. He stepped back. He was the Duke of Alnwick again. Mrs. Brackley will bring you the first of the household books at 11. My mother rides to the village every Wednesday morning between 10 and 1. You will read here. You will speak of what you find to no one but me. When you have questions, you will bring them to this room, and if the door is locked from within, you will not knock. You will go away and return. Yes, your grace. And Miss Pelham. Your grace? You will call me Alnwick when we are alone. Your grace in the corridors. My mother listens through walls. Yes, Alnwick. The name in her mouth was strange to both of them. Neither of them acknowledged it. She unlocked the door and left him standing at the reading table, and she carried the sealed contract folded inside the cuff of her sleeve until she had reached her own attic, and there she slid it between the pages of a Bible her aunt had given her at 14, and she stood a long moment with her hand upon the closed cover before she went back down for the linens. By the end of that first week, she had read 4 household books, 2 receipts of Wilbraham the tenant agent, and the private ledger of the small farm at Craster which Augusta had been drawing from for 11 years under the heading of a charity that did not exist. She did not tell Ralph everything at once. She had learned from her mother's long dying that a woman who arrived at a man's door with a pile of terrible news was a woman he stopped opening the door for. She brought him instead 1 page at a time. On Monday, the Craster farm. On Tuesday, the fictitious charity. On Wednesday, the coachman's wages, which had been paid in full to the coachman, and then, twice a quarter, half of them clawed back through a receipt for stabling that no stable had rendered. He did not thank her for any of it. He read each page, and he said, "Go on," and he made a small pencil mark in the margin of a notebook he kept locked in the desk drawer. On the Friday of that first week, he looked up from the coachman's wages and said, "Do you sleep?" And she said, "Enough," and he said, "That is not what I asked." And she said, "No, Alnwick," and he nodded and said nothing more. And on the Saturday, there was a small iron bolt on the inside of her attic door that had not been there before. Mrs. Brackley had put it on herself, without instruction, at 6:30 in the morning, while the family were still at prayers. Mrs. Brackley did not say who had asked her to do it. Mrs. Brackley did not need to. 3 weeks after that rainy night, in the second week of November, Hester came down to the small library with a folded page in her sleeve that was heavier than any she had brought before. Ralph was at the reading table with an unopened letter from the Bank of England in front of him and a cup of chocolate going cold beside it. "Alnwick," he looked up. "There is a name on the transfer of the common stock that is not your brother's." He set the cup down. He set it down very carefully so that it made no sound at all against the saucer. "Show me." She unfolded the page. She had copied it herself from the register in Augusta's writing room at 10:15 on the Wednesday, with the door propped open on a bootjack so that she would hear the wheels of the carriage if it returned early. The hand was Augusta's, the signature was Clarence's, but beneath Clarence's signature, in a third hand, small and even and unmistakably a man of business, was written, "Witness this day, J. Wilbraham, Captain, retired." Ralph looked at the name for a long moment. Then he looked at Hester. "You are certain? I copied it 3 times. I burned 2. This is the 3rd. Wilbraham," he said, "was my father's man for 30 years. He was refused my mother's hand in 1786. He wintered at this house every year until my father died, and has not been seen in the county since the funeral. He has been seen, Alnwick. He was in the yellow drawing-room the Thursday you were in London. He drank ratafia. He left a glove." Ralph rose. He walked to the window. He stood a long time looking out at the drive, at the bare avenue of limes, at the November light on the wet gravel. When he spoke, his voice had gone very quiet, and Hester, who had learned in 22 months to distinguish 6 kinds of quiet in that house, understood that this was the one that came before a man did something that could not be undone. "Methuen comes down on Monday," he said. "You will meet him in this room at 3. You will bring him this page, and you will bring him the Craster ledger, and you will bring him the coachman's receipts, and you will bring him, Miss Pelham, the fragment you carry under your stays." She went very still. "Alnwick, Finton O'Hare, Gretna, 1789. He did not turn from the window. "I have known for a week. Mrs. Brackley saw the corner of the paper the night you scorched your sleeve at the wash-house grate. She told me because she is 61 years old and she has decided, at last, whose house this is. You will bring it to Methuen on Monday. And then, Miss Pelham, we will see what my mother is willing to pay for her silence, and what she is not." He turned. Then, he looked at her across the room, across the reading table, across 3 weeks of pages, carried one at a time up a servant's stair. "Do you understand what I am asking of you?" "Yes, Alnwick." "Say it. You are asking me to put into a solicitor's hand the one paper that keeps me alive in this house." "Yes." "And in return?" "In return," he said, "on the day Methuen files it, I will announce our betrothal in the London Gazette, whether we mean it or not, so that when my mother strikes at you, she strikes at a future Duchess of Alnwick, and the magistrate at Alnwick who takes her tea on Tuesdays will remember, on Wednesday, whose bread he eats." Hester did not sit down. There was still no chair. But her hand found the edge of the reading table, and she held on to it very lightly, as a woman holds on to a rail on a ship that has begun, at last, to move. "Whether we mean it or not," she repeated. "Whether we mean it or not, that is a precise, elegant lie, Alnwick. "It is the only lie I have ever offered a woman," he said, in the hope that she would help me make it true. She did not answer. She folded the page. She slid it back into her sleeve. She unlocked the door, and at the threshold she paused, without turning, and she said, "Monday, 3 o'clock. I will bring all 4. Then she was gone, and Ralph stood a long time at the window, watching the November light move along the wet gravel of the drive, and he did not know, and could not know, that on the other side of the house his mother had risen half an hour earlier than usual, and had already sent a groom, on the fastest horse in the Alnwick stables, with a sealed note to a captain in Holborn, whose glove she had kept, quite deliberately, in the yellow drawing-room. The groom did not reach Holborn. He reached the 3rd milestone past Barnet, where the road bent past a coppice of alders, and there a second rider on a rougher horse was waiting for him, with a civil word and a heavier purse than the Dowager Duchess had thought to offer. The sealed note changed hands in the space of a paternoster. By nightfall, it lay open on a plain deal table, in a room above a chop-house in Chancery Lane, and Edmund Methuen was reading it by a single tallow candle, his gold-rimmed spectacles pushed high on his bald head, his mouth moving without sound. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it, precisely, along its original creases, and slid it into the inner pocket of his black coat, next to the small brass key he had carried since the previous Duke had pressed it into his palm in the summer of 1789. "So," Methuen said, to no one but the candle, "she writes to the captain herself." He did not sleep that night. Before the milk carts began their round, he was in a hackney to Lombard Street, and by 10 of the clock, a boy in a leather apron was carrying his card, on a small silver tray, into the paneled parlor of Alnwick House. Ralph was already dressed. He had not, in truth, undressed. Since Hester had walked out of his library at dusk on the previous day, he had sat by the same window, watching the light change on the wet gravel, letting the fire fall to a bed of red coals, and rising only to write 2 notes, one to his sister at the Dower House, one to the manager of the Alnwick banking house in Lombard Street. Both notes were short, both bore his seal, and the ring, when he pressed it into the wax, left the print of a tower and 3 ravens as clean as a coin from the mint. Methuen came in without ceremony, laid the intercepted note on the table between them, and stepped back. Ralph read it. The scar above his eyebrow lifted a hair's breadth. Nothing else in his face moved at all. "How many hours old?" "14, your grace." "And Wilbraham?" "Still in Holborn. He does not know the note failed to reach him." Ralph laid 2 fingers on the paper. "Then he will not know until we choose that he should. There is more." Methuen set his leather satchel on the table and drew out an oiled bundle wrapped in green baize. Inside lay a small iron casket of the sort used, in the last century, by country solicitors and provincial banks. It was black with age and had been sealed at the lid with a rough disc of wax that bore, quite plainly, the arms of the 8th Duke of Alnwick. "Your father's," Methuen said, "lodged with our house in the summer of '90, 1 week after your parents' wedding. Instructions, to be opened by his heir, upon the eve of any legal challenge to the succession. I judge that eve to be now." Ralph did not move. "You have carried this 38 years. "I have, your grace." "Open it." Methuen turned the small brass key. The lock complained, then gave, and the lid rose on a smell of old paper and colder iron. Inside were 3 documents, folded thrice, and a slim book bound in red morocco, no larger than a lady's psalter. The first document was the marriage certificate of one Fintan O'Hare, gentleman, of Kerry, to Augusta Bertram, spinster, of Norfolk, celebrated at Gretna Green on the 12th of June, 1789. Ralph had known that this paper existed. He had known it since the last hour before dawn in his library. He set it aside without a word. The second document was a signed statement, in his father's hand, that on the 14th day of October, in the year 1790, Ralph Vernon Verney, heir apparent to the Duchy of Alnwick, then aged 14 years and 2 months, had received in the paddock at the back of Alnwick Hall the fire of Mr. Barnaby Coote of Northumberland, over a dispute concerning a spaniel, and had returned that fire with a ball that had passed through the said Mr. Coote's shoulder, that the 8th Duke, being informed, had bribed the 2nd, silenced the surgeon, and paid the Cootes £800 for the removal of the boy to Italy for the space of 1 year, and that his son was thereby, in the strict letter of the law, liable to indictment for felony should any of the 4 persons present ever speak. Ralph read it twice. He did not touch it. When he lifted his eyes from the paper, the gray of them had gone very still. He knew. He knew, Your Grace. About her marriage. About the Irishman. From the eve of his own wedding. Yes. And he said nothing. He purchased her silence upon your duel, with his silence upon her Gretna. It was, in his understanding, a bargain that would hold as long as both parties remained alive. He is not alive. No, Your Grace. And she has begun, as you see, to write to a captain. Ralph laughed once, without pleasure. It was a short, dry sound, the kind a man makes when he understands that the trap he has been standing in for 22 years was, in fact, a trap of his father's making, laid down for love and left ticking like a clock. He picked up the third document. It was a certified deposition, sworn before a magistrate in Newcastle, from one Barnaby Coote, now, Methuen murmured, 7 years in his grave, attesting to the whole affair of the paddock and naming the second and the surgeon. It had been taken, at the 8th Duke's expense, in the summer of '91, and lodged with the iron casket for precisely this hour. Your father, Methuen said quietly, did not trust her never to move. He wished you, on the day she moved, to have the counterstroke in your hand within the hour. He might, Ralph said, have told me. He might. He judged that a boy of 14 who had shot a man over a spaniel was better served by not knowing that a woman under his roof could unmake him with a word. Ralph laid the papers side by side on the table. The Gretna certificate, the confession in his father's hand, the Newcastle deposition, 3 sheets of paper, 38 years old, and between them the whole balance of his life. He said, at last, "Where does it leave us?" Methuen took off his spectacles, polished them on a corner of black cravat, and replaced them. "It leaves you," he said, "in the position your father designed. Her Grace the Dowager cannot move against your title without exposing her own bigamy, which will strip her of dower, jointure, precedence, and the guardianship of Lady May, and cannot expose the duel of '90 without confessing that she has, these last 22 years, purchased her silence with it. If she strikes, she falls. If she does not strike, she keeps the appearance of what she is not. The letter to Captain Wilbraham suggests she has decided to strike. And Clarence? Lord Clarence signed the transfer of the ordinary shares in his own hand. The transfer is valid on its face. It becomes void the instant the transferor rescinds. You, Your Grace, hold the letter of rescission. You have always held it. You have simply, until this hour, chosen not to sign. Ralph looked at the casket, then at the window, then at Methuen. Bring me pen and ink. Methuen brought pen and ink. Ralph did not sign at once. He sat for a long minute with the pen held above the paper, and when he spoke, his voice was lower than before, almost conversational, as though he were speaking to someone in the room whom Methuen could not see. She read the ledger, he said. She read every page. She counted the transfers before I counted them. She knew the number of ordinary shares before I did. She is, at this moment, in a lodging in Holborn, because my mother laid a trap for her the same night she laid a trap for me. Yes, Your Grace. I will not sign until she is in the room. Methuen inclined his head. It shall be so. By noon, a plain-closed carriage from Alnwick House was in Holborn. It did not stop at the lodgings the Dowager had prepared. It stopped, instead, at a small unshuttered inn behind Furnival's Court, where a young woman in a faded jonquil gown with a stain of ink at the shoulder had been sitting since dawn in the coffee-room, mending, with very small stitches, a tear in the hem of a servant's apron, because she could not bear to sit with her hands empty. She looked up when the door opened and did not rise. The needle paused in the cambric. "Miss Pelham," said the coachman, bowing from the doorway. "His Grace begs the favor." Hester set down the apron. She smoothed the yellowed muslin over her knee, quite carefully, with the flat of her hand. She said, "One moment," and finished the stitch in progress. Then she rose, tied on her plain brown bonnet, and followed him out. She did not speak in the carriage. Ralph, waiting at the door of the room above Chancery Lane, did not speak either. He handed her in over the threshold with the courtesy he would have shown a queen, and she took a chair at the deal table, without being asked, and let her eyes move once over the 3 documents, the iron casket, and the pen laid across the letter of rescission. She read the sheets in the order they were placed. She read them once, she did not touch them. When she looked up, her hazel eyes were dry and very awake. "Sign it, Your Grace." "Not yet." "Sign it. She has already written to the captain. She will not stop because you delay. Sign it, and the ordinary shares are yours by breakfast." I mean to sign it, Ralph said, in her presence. Hester was silent. Then, very slowly, she nodded once. Yes, that is better. Methuen coughed. Your Grace, if I may, there is a difficulty. Speak. The Dowager will not come to Lombard Street on your summons. She has already refused too. She will come to a ballroom on the captain's arm, and she has, this morning, accepted an invitation to a small evening at Lady Ashcombe's, in Grosvenor Square, 1 week hence. It is a very small evening, 60 covers. Every one of the 9 councillors of the bank will be present. So will 3 ministers, the Lord Chancellor's brother, and the editor of the Morning Post. Ralph laid the pen back in its stand. Then we sign it, he said, in Grosvenor Square. Your Grace, in her sight, in their sight, with the pen she raised me to use. He turned to Hester. Will you attend me there? In this gown, Your Grace? In any gown you please. Choose it yourself. Send the bill to Alnwick House. They will say, Hester said, quite evenly, that I have seduced you. They will say it in any gown. They will say it louder in silk. Then let them, Ralph said, say it loudly. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in the corner of her mouth moved, not quite into a smile, not quite away from it. Very well, Your Grace, but you will not choose the silk, and you will not choose the hour of my arrival. And when your mother stands to speak, you will let her speak to the end, before you take the pen up. Do you agree? I agree. Then we have, Hester said, a bargain. She rose. She did not curtsy. She let her hand rest, once, upon the edge of the iron casket, not on the papers, not on the pen, only upon the cold black lid, as though she were setting a seal of her own upon it. Then she went out. Methuen watched the door close. He said, after a moment, without looking at his duke, Your father would have liked her, Your Grace. My father, Ralph said, would have been afraid of her. He would have liked her the more for that. The week between that hour and Lady Ashcombe's evening passed as such weeks pass in London, which is to say it passed in a great deal of small, precise motion beneath a surface of perfect quiet. Ralph did not go into society. He rode in the park at first light and returned before the fashionable hour. He answered no notes. He dined alone. On the Wednesday, he sat for 2 hours at the Alnwick banking house in Lombard Street, in a room he had not entered in 3 years, and read every page of every ledger from the day of his father's death to the present, and at the end of it, he wrote 3 lines on a sheet of foolscap and gave it to Methuen without a word. At the Dower House, Lady May received a plain wooden box with no card. Inside, folded in white paper, lay a length of pale gray ribbon, and beneath the ribbon a small key, and beneath the key, a note in her brother's hand that said only, The upper cabinet in the yellow drawing room. When you are alone, burn the letter you find. Keep the other 3. She waited until her attendant went to fetch broth. She rose, painfully, on her deformed hands, and crossed the corridor. At Holborn, Captain Wilbraham polished the galloons on his scarlet coat and wrote a speech he intended to deliver at Grosvenor Square, in which the name of the late Duchess of Alnwick was to be spoken with tears, and the name of Miss Pelham was to be spoken with none. At Alnwick House, the Dowager Duchess of Alnwick chose a gown of black bombazine with jet buttons, a lorgnon of gold on a chain, and, from the locked drawer at the back of her bureau, a small folded list, which she smoothed twice upon the marble of her dressing table and put into her reticule. And in a lodging above a milliner's in Bond Street, a modiste girl fitted a gown of saffron crepe over the shoulders of Miss Hester Pelham and pinned, along the low square of the neckline, a length of tulle, worked in gold thread, the color of a harvest moon, and the modiste herself, kneeling by the hem, looked up once at the young woman above her and forgot, for the first time in 20 years, to speak. Hester stood very straight. She said, Higher at the shoulder, please. My arms will be raised at some point in the evening, and I do not wish the seam to strain. Yes, mademoiselle. And no rouge. I am not attending in order to be pretty. No, mademoiselle. She turned, once, before the long glass. The saffron caught the November light from the window and threw it back like the inside of a wheat field at noon. She looked at herself for the space of a breath. Then she looked away. That will do, she said. Send it in the plain box. I will dress at Alnwick House. The night of Lady Ashcombe's evening arrived. The lamps were lit along Grosvenor Square by 5 of the clock, and by 7 the link boys were running in front of the carriages, and by 7:30 the marble stair of the house was crowded with men in black coats and women in silver and rose and the softer colors of an early winter season. The Dowager Duchess of Alnwick arrived at 8, on the arm of Captain Wilbraham, and was received at the head of the stair with the deference proper to her rank. And behind her, at a distance of perhaps 10 minutes, the Duke of Alnwick himself was announced, in a coat of black superfine and a plain white cravat, alone. He did not look for his mother. He did not look for the councillors. He walked, quite steadily, into the second drawing-room, took a glass of hock from a passing tray, and stood beside the fire with the glass untouched in his hand, waiting. At 8:20, the doors at the head of the stair opened again, and the major domo's staff struck the marble twice. Miss Hester Pelham. She came down the stair alone, in saffron, with the parure of Alnwick amber and gold at her throat, and Ralph Verney, 9th Duke of Alnwick, set down his untouched glass upon the mantel, and crossed the drawing-room to meet her at the foot of the last step. The Dowager Duchess of Alnwick, standing in the doorway of the further room with her lorgnon raised, saw him take his ward's hand upon his arm, and understood, for the first time in her long and careful life, that the trap she had baited had already closed behind her. Augusta did not move from the doorway. She lowered the lorgnon with the deliberation of a woman who had spent 40 years learning that a raised chin is worth more than a raised voice, and she turned toward the small anteroom on her left, where 3 of her chosen councillors stood pretending to admire a portrait of the 3rd Duke. "Gentlemen," she said, "the hour is upon us." The candles in Grosvenor Square burned low and yellow. 400 of them had been lit at 8, and now, near midnight, the wax pooled thickly in the silver branches, and the air above the crowded rooms shimmered faintly, as if the ballroom itself were beginning to sweat. Hester felt the tremor in Ralph's arm before she saw the cause. It traveled from his wrist into her gloved fingers, small and precise, like the click of a lock. She did not look up at him. She had learned, in the last 3 months, that a woman on the arm of the Duke of Alnwick must never appear to search his face for direction. The house was watching, and the house interpreted every glance as evidence. "They mean to do it here," she said, low under the music. "Yes. In front of everyone. That is the point." He guided her past the 3rd pillar and toward the alcove where Lady May had been settled with her cushions and her shawl. May was pale, but her eyes were bright, and her thin fingers closed at once upon Hester's hand. "She has been speaking to Wilbraham," May whispered, "for a quarter of an hour, in the yellow salon." Ralph's jaw shifted a fraction. "How many others?" "9, I think. She has counted them on her fan." He bent and kissed his sister's forehead, and the gesture was so unadorned, so unlike a duke and so like a brother, that Hester felt the ballroom recede a step. Then he straightened, and he was again the man in the black coat with the pearl buttons and the storm-gray eyes that had learned early not to signal weather. "Stay with her," he said to Hester. "If it begins, do not answer them. Ralph, do not answer them, Hester. Whatever they say." He crossed the floor with the unhurried, cat-like step that had once carried him across the yard at Eton toward a boy twice his size, and Hester, watching him go, understood at last why the late Duke had covered up a duel fought at 14. Some men were born already at war. Augusta reached the center of the room at the same moment as her son. The orchestra was between country dances. The small silence that opens between 2 pieces of music had descended, and into that silence she stepped, the black bombazine of her sleeves whispering. "Your Grace," she said, not softly, not loudly, pitched, rather, so that the 4 ambassadors near the far door heard as clearly as the Countess of Marchmont at her elbow. "There is a matter which must be addressed before the room." He inclined his head 1/2 inch. "By all means, madam." She raised her hand. From behind her, Wilbraham emerged, in his old scarlet coat with the faded gold, followed by 3 gray-headed gentlemen in the sober black of the city. One of them carried a folded document tied with a green ribbon. "The Council of the Alnwick Banking House," Augusta announced, and her voice climbed clean over the whispers, "has this evening voted upon a resolution of the gravest kind. 9 of the 12 directors have set their names to a petition declaring that His Grace, the 9th Duke, is by reason of protracted grief, unfit to conduct the affairs of the House, and requesting his temporary retirement from its governance." A single note fell out of the harp on the dais, as if the harpist's hand had jumped. Ralph did not move. "Read it. It shall be read," said the gray-headed man with the ribbon scroll, and he began, in the flat voice of long habit, to read out the names. 9 of them, each name landing in the room like a small dull stone dropped into a still pond. Hester counted them without meaning to. She had, after all, been trained in ledgers. 9 of 12 was the number Augusta had needed, and no more. It was the number of a bought majority, not of a natural one. The reader reached the end. He folded the paper. He inclined his head to the dowager. In accordance with the bylaws, Augusta said, the interim presidency of the House falls to the next male member of the family in the direct line. She turned her head, and Clarence stepped out from between two potted palms. His cravat was crooked. His eyes were bright with wine, and with something else, some queasy exaltation that his mouth could not quite disguise. He bowed to the room. The room did not bow back. Lord Clarence Verney, Augusta said, will take up the presidency at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then Wilbraham stepped forward. He had waited 22 years for this evening. Every line of him spoke of the campaign at last joined. He drew himself to attention with the automatic snap of a man who had been an officer under Wellington, and he addressed himself, not to Ralph, but to the whole room. My lords, ladies, it is with regret that I must add a private circumstance to a public one. He paused. His green eyes swept the ballroom and found Hester in the alcove. It has come to the attention of the family that His Grace's judgment has been influenced, these many months, by a young woman received into his household under the pretense of companion to his sister, an obscure girl of no family, taken up from a country vicarage, promoted to positions unbecoming to her station, and permitted, in the honest opinion of many present, to work upon a grieving duke by arts which propriety forbids me to name here. The room drew one breath and held it. Miss Pelham, he said, and Hester's name in his mouth sounded like the name of a horse he had once shot. Miss Pelham has been observed in the private library with His Grace, at hours no gentlewoman would keep. Miss Pelham has read his correspondence. Miss Pelham has taken meals at his table. Miss Pelham, we are told upon good authority, has an interest of £500 a year settled upon a woman with no claim of blood upon this house. Hester's hand did not tremble. May's did, in hers. It is my melancholy duty, Wilbraham said, turning at last to face her across the floor, to name this arrangement for what it is. He did not name it, he did not need to. The room named it for him in the small hiss of taffeta, as women turned their shoulders 1 degree. Ralph took 1 step forward. Only one. Methuen, in the shadow near the pillar, closed his hand upon the pasteboard case beneath his arm. Captain Wilbraham, Ralph said, Your Grace. You have said enough. I have said what any friend of the late Duchess must say. You were not a friend of the late Duchess. You were a suitor she refused. The captain's throat moved. And you will not, Ralph said, speak of Miss Pelham again, in a public room. You will not speak of her, sir, in any room. If you have a private accusation, you will bring it to me at 11 tomorrow in Lincoln's Inn, and you will bring your seconds, and I will bring mine. Augusta laid her hand upon her son's sleeve. It was the first time she had touched him in 2 years. Ralph, she said, the petition stands. The presidency has passed. This is a council matter and a family matter. It is not a matter of pistols. He looked down at her hand upon his sleeve. He did not shake it off. He simply looked at it, as one looks at a spider on a book, and after a moment, she withdrew her fingers, and he turned once more to the room. The petition has been read, he said. It shall be answered in the proper place, before the proper persons, and at the proper hour. Meanwhile, the music. My mother has interrupted a country dance, and the harpist waits. He inclined his head to the dais. The conductor lifted his bow with the terror of a man who had never before been ordered to save a life with a violin, and the country dance resumed, thinly, unevenly, as if the instruments themselves were embarrassed. Ralph crossed to the alcove. His face, close up, was the color of old ivory. Come, he said to Hester, it is time you were taken home. I am not going home in your carriage, Your Grace. He stopped. They will say, she said, that you smuggled me out. They will say that I fled. They will say a great many things, and every one of them will hang upon a carriage with your arms on the door. Hester, look at me. He looked at her. You have a fight to conduct here, she said. It is a fight for a name that is older than mine, and for a bank that keeps 100 families in bread, and for a sister whose peace of mind will not survive another scandal. If I climb into your carriage tonight, they will say that I have been paid off. If I walk out of this house alone, they will say only that I am a proud, foolish girl. I would rather be a proud, foolish girl. You will not walk. It is nearly a mile to any respectable inn, and it is raining. Then I shall walk in the rain. Hester, Ralph. She had never used his Christian name aloud, not in the library, not in Lombard Street, not in the small hours when he had bent over the ledgers and she had bent over the letters, and their shoulders had touched by accident, and neither had drawn back. Now she used it here, in an alcove, in the middle of a public ruin, and it landed between them with the small, definite sound of a coin dropped upon a marble slab. "Ralph," she said again, quieter. "Go and finish it." He held her eyes for the length of a breath. "Take the shawl," he said at last. "It is May's. Take it, please." She took the shawl. May was already fastening it about her shoulders with her deformed, patient fingers, and she pressed into Hester's palm a small square of folded paper. "For later," May whispered. "Do not open it in the street. Open it when you are dry." Hester slipped the paper into her glove. She kissed the sick woman's temple. She rose. She walked the length of the ballroom without haste, without lowered eyes, past the Countess of Marchmont, past the 4 ambassadors, past Wilbraham, past Clarence, past the reader with the ribboned scroll, and past, at the very last, the Dowager Duchess, who did not look at her, and to whom she did not look. At the great door, the footman opened for her without instruction. He was one of the servants Mrs. Brackley had chosen. His face gave nothing away, but his hand, as he passed her the bonnet from the hook, gave a small, unmistakable squeeze upon the ribbon. She stepped out into Grosvenor Square. The rain had begun in earnest. It was the fine, cold, needling rain of a London October, the sort that soaks a wool cloak before a woman has crossed a street. The link boys had gone in under the porticos with their torches. The carriages stood in a black row along the railings, their coachmen hunched, their horses steaming. Hester turned east. She did not know, precisely, where she was walking. She knew only that she must not stop at the first respectable inn, which would send a boy to Alnwick House within the hour, and that she must not turn toward Piccadilly, where she would meet the last of the Verney set coming home from their clubs. She kept to the smaller streets. She crossed Bond Street with her head down. She crossed Regent Street with the water already running from the brim of her bonnet into her collar. By the time she reached the top of Long Acre, her boots were wet through, and the saffron gown beneath the borrowed shawl clung damply to her shins. She walked on. She thought, as she walked, of very small things, of the price of a coach seat to Northumberland, of the exact number of shillings in the reticule at her wrist, of the aunt in the Yorkshire vicarage who would take her in with fewer questions than kindness, of the letter she would write in the morning to Mrs. Brackley to say that she was safe, of the letter she would not write to Ralph. At the corner of Drury Lane, a chairman offered her his chair for a shilling. She shook her head. She had only silver now, and silver, she had discovered in 3 months at Alnwick Hall, was a currency to be spent on other people, not upon one's own comfort. The bells of St. Clement Danes struck one. She reached, at last, the sign of the Blue Boar in Holborn, an old, respectable inn of the 2nd class, where the coaches to the north changed horses at 4 in the morning. It had a low door and a low ceiling, and a landlady in a print apron who took one look at Hester's dripping bonnet and her fine, ruined shawl, and asked no questions at all. "Fire in the small parlor, ma'am," the landlady said, "and a bed above it if you want it. Shilling for the fire, 3 for the bed. Both, please. Name for the book?" Hester paused. "Miss Hester Pelham," she said. She had not, in all her 23 years, been ashamed of her name, and she was not about to begin tonight. The landlady wrote it in a large round hand and asked no more. In the small parlor, alone, Hester set the shawl to dry upon the settle. She sat before the fire. She took off her wet gloves. From the palm of the right one, she drew the little square of folded paper May had pressed there. She opened it. It was not, as she had half expected, a note of comfort. It was a list, a very short list, in May's careful invalid's hand. Names taken this morning from the 3rd packet, in the drawer under the writing slope. She has not missed them. I have copied them true. Below that, 9 names, and beside each name, in the same careful hand, a sum in guineas. Hester read the list twice. She read it a 3rd time. The 9 names were the 9 names Wilbraham had read out an hour before, standing in the middle of the ballroom, with his old scarlet coat and his old grievance, and his mouth full of her ruin. She folded the list very small. She put it inside the bodice of the saffron gown, next to the skin, where the damp of her clothes could not reach it. Then, for the first time in 3 months, she allowed herself to weep, not for herself, not for the ballroom. She wept for the girl in the faded yellow dress who had climbed the back stairs of Alnwick Hall in October with a tea tray, and for the Duke who had walked into the library with rain still on his coat and asked her if she had seen the page, and for what those two people had almost been permitted to become before Augusta had struck. She wept for perhaps 4 minutes. Then she stopped, because the fire needed a log, and she got up and put one on, and she sat down again in her damp saffron and her borrowed shawl, and she began, in her head, to draft the letter she would carry to Lombard Street at 9 o'clock the following morning, and to whom she would carry it, and in what precise order the names upon the list would fall. Outside, in Holborn, the rain went on. In Grosvenor Square, the ballroom emptied. In the small anteroom at Alnwick House, the Dowager Duchess of Alnwick sat down at last upon a gilt chair and, for the first time that evening, permitted her hand to shake as she closed the drawer beneath the writing slope and found, in the third packet, that a certain sheet of paper was no longer where she had left it. The drawer would not lie still beneath her hand. Augusta pressed her palm flat against the writing slope, as if pressure alone could restore what had gone missing, and the gilt chair creaked once beneath her weight. Somewhere beyond the anteroom door, a footman crossed the marble with a tray of hock, and the sound of glass touching glass came to her muffled, small, distant. She counted the packets again. 3 ribbons, 3 seals. And in the third, the sheet that had listed 9 names and 9 figures in her own precise hand, gone. She rose. She did not permit herself to hurry. At that same hour, 5 streets away, Hester was climbing the narrow stair of a house in Holborn, with a candle stub in one hand and a folded oilskin in the other. Lady May had sent for her by a scullery boy at 11:30, and the boy had said only that the young lady could not sleep, and that the young lady had something in her lap that she would give to no one but Miss Pelham. The door at the top of the stair opened before Hester touched it. May sat propped against 3 pillows, her hair unbraided, her deformed fingers curled around a sheet of laid paper as if around a live coal. Her cheeks bore 2 spots of color that had nothing to do with fever. "I went into her writing desk," May said. Her voice was thin and clear. "I know I should not have. She left the key in the lock, and I thought if I did not look now, I never would." Hester set the candle upon the nightstand. "Show me." May unfolded the sheet with the slow care of a woman handling glass. 9 names ran down the left-hand column in the Dowager's copper plate. Beside each name, a sum. Beside each sum, a date in the last fortnight. At the foot of the page, in the same hand, a single line. "Paid from the 3rd account. Per C. C for Clarence," May whispered. "C for Clarence," Hester said. She read the list once. She read it twice. On the 3rd reading, her hand rose to her throat, not from shock, but from the sudden, cold arithmetic of what the paper now made possible. "Where is his Grace? He rode from Alnwick House an hour ago. Methuen was to meet him at Lombard Street at first light." Hester folded the sheet along the crease May had made. She slid it inside the bodice of her dress, against the ribs, where the warmth of her body might steady it. "Sleep now," she said. "By breakfast, the house will be quieter than you have ever known it." May caught her wrist. The grip was weak and terribly certain. "Do not let him be gentle, Miss Pelham. Not tonight." "No," Hester said. "Not tonight." She was in a hackney before the Church of St. Andrew struck 2. Ralph was already at the bank when she arrived. He stood in the outer chamber of the Alnwick banking house in Lombard Street, with his sober black casaca still dusted with the wet of the ride, and the anger in him had cooled to that clean, quiet temperature at which men decide things that cannot be undone. Methuen stood at his shoulder with the leather satchel under his arm. 2 clerks waited at the tall desk, pens laid down, pretending to read a ledger neither of them saw. Hester came in without knocking. She did not speak. She drew the folded sheet from her bodice and laid it flat upon the reading slope between the 2 lamps. Ralph looked at the paper. He did not touch it. "May? May." He read the list. His mouth did not move. Only the small muscle at the hinge of the jaw shifted once, as though a lock had turned. "9 names," he said. "9 names," she answered, "and the account they were paid from." Methuen leaned in. His spectacles caught the lamplight. He read the line at the foot of the page, and for the first time in 32 years of practice, Edmund Methuen permitted himself a small, thin smile. "Your Grace," he said, "the ordinary shares that were transferred to Lord Clarence in September were revocable at the discretion of the 9th Duke of Alnwick, upon presentation of evidence of fraud against the founder's line. This paper is evidence. This paper is signed. This paper is in her own hand. Then let us go in, Ralph said. The boardroom lay behind two mahogany doors at the end of the marble corridor. At this hour, 3 days before the quarter-day audit, all 12 members of the Alnwick banking house were assembled inside, upon the Dowager's own summons, waiting for a document she had promised to deliver by dawn. They did not know that the document was already folded inside the coat of the man now walking the length of the corridor toward them. Ralph opened the doors himself. 12 heads lifted. Clarence was in the chairman's seat. His cravat was crooked. A glass of port stood at his elbow, though the hour was 3 in the morning, and he had the bright, damp eyes of a man who has been laughing too loudly for too long. When he saw his brother in the doorway, the laughter went out of him as a candle goes out. Ralph, he half rose. I did not expect. No, Ralph said quietly. You did not. He walked the length of the long table without looking at any of them. He set the folded sheet upon the green baize before Clarence. He did not sit. Methuen. Methuen came to the head of the table and turned to face the room. Gentlemen, I hold in my hand a list, in the Dowager Duchess's own hand, of 9 sums paid in the last fortnight from a private account of the Alnwick estate to 9 gentlemen at this table. The sums correspond to your signatures upon the petition of the 15th instant, declaring His Grace mentally incapable of the discharge of his duties. His Grace being at all times, and today the sole holder of the ordinary shares of this establishment, the letters of nomination by which each of you sits at this table are hereby, by virtue of the Founder's Charter, revocable. He drew from the satchel a sheaf of parchments already sealed and dated. His Grace instructs me to revoke them now. A gentleman in a bottle green coat at the third seat cleared his throat. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. Sir Peter, Ralph said, without turning. Your sum was 420 guineas. It is written here beside your name. Do you wish to be heard upon the matter of regularity? Sir Peter did not. Methuen, Your Grace? Ralph laid one gloved hand flat upon the baize. His voice did not rise. Dismiss every last one of them. Methuen went round the table. He laid a folded parchment before each of the 9, and each parchment bore the seal of the 9th Duke of Alnwick and the small red disc of the Founder's Charter. He did not speak. He did not need to. One by one the 9 gentlemen rose, gathered their hats and their gloves, and walked past Ralph without looking at him, and the corridor beyond the mahogany doors began to fill with the sound of footsteps going away. The 3 remaining directors did not move. Gentlemen, Ralph said to them, the audit will proceed at 10. I trust you will find the accounts in better order than you left them. They bowed. They did not speak. Clarence had not risen from the chairman's seat. His hand still lay upon the folded list, as though he thought that by keeping it beneath his palm he might yet unwrite it. Ralph came round the table to him. Get up. Ralph, I did not. Get up, Clarence. Clarence stood. You will go to your rooms in Half Moon Street. You will remain there. At noon tomorrow, you will present yourself at the offices of the Morning Post, and you will dictate to the editor a letter which Mr. Methuen will have written for you. You will sign it. On the 2nd of December you will take the northern mail to the property at Kilbucho. You will remain there until I am dead. Clarence's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Do you understand me? Yes. Then go. Clarence went. Ralph stood a long moment at the head of the table, with his palm still flat upon the baize. Hester, who had waited by the doors through all of it and not spoken once, saw the tremor pass through his shoulders and then leave him, as a fever leaves the body of a man who has decided at last to live. He turned. He looked at her across the length of the room. Miss Pelham, Your Grace, we have a ball to attend on Thursday. The ball at Alnwick House on the 11th of December was afterwards spoken of, for a full generation, as the night the great families of the county learned that a house does not always fall in the direction its enemies have chosen. 400 wax candles burned in the sconces of the long gallery. The Lord Chancellor came, though he had not been to a private ball in 6 years. Methuen came in his own black casaca of antique cut, the leather satchel replaced by a folio bound in red morocco. Lady May came in a chair carried by 2 footmen, and was set at the head of the gallery upon a chaise beneath the portrait of Isolde, and Ralph bent to kiss her forehead before he greeted any other guest. Augusta arrived at 10. She wore black watered silk and her granate comb and her onyx cameo, and she had rehearsed her entrance in the glass of her dressing room for 1 hour and a quarter. She swept the length of the gallery upon Wilbraham's arm, She smiled at the wives of the county. She did not know, yet, that the letter she had gone to fetch from the writing slope at 4 o'clock that morning had not been there. The Lord Chancellor rose from his chair beside the fireplace at 10:30. The music did not stop. The music simply thinned, the way a river thins when it comes to a shallow, and every head in the long gallery turned toward the fireplace without anyone appearing to have moved. "Your Grace," the Chancellor said to Ralph, "you asked me to bring a certain document tonight. I have brought it." He drew from a case a single sheet of parchment. He unfolded it. He turned it, without haste, so that the assembly might see the parish seal upon the head of it. "This is the register copy of a marriage solemnized at Gretna Green on the 9th of June, 1789, between one Fintan O'Hare, gentleman of Sligo, and one Augusta Mary Wentworth, spinster, of this county. The marriage was never dissolved. The gentleman died of a fever at sea in the December following. The lady, being at the date of her second marriage in 1801, already the widow of Mr. O'Hare, is not, and has never been, the lawful Duchess of Alnwick." The gallery did not gasp. It did something quieter and more terrible. It fell still. Augusta's hand, upon Wilbraham's sleeve, did not tremble. She had trained it for 40 years not to tremble, but Wilbraham's arm went out from under her hand as a plank goes out from under a foot, and the captain took one step, and then another, backward into the crowd, and the crowd opened for him and closed behind him, and he was gone. The Chancellor folded the parchment. "Madam," he said, not unkindly, "you will leave this house tonight." Augusta looked once at Ralph across the length of the gallery. He returned the look. Neither of them spoke. She turned. She walked the length of the marble floor alone in her black-watered silk, and the 400 candles burned upon her the whole way, and the doors at the far end were opened for her by 2 footmen who did not meet her eye, and she went out into the December cold, and the doors were closed. The music resumed. It resumed slowly, uncertainly, as musicians resume when they are not sure they have been given leave. Then Ralph lifted one hand to the leader of the orchestra, and the leader bowed, and the first bars of a waltz rose into the gallery, and the great crystal chandelier above the dancing floor turned once upon its chain and threw a shiver of light across the polished boards. At the head of the great staircase, Hester appeared. She had not worn faded jonquil that night. The gown was saffron, deep saffron of crêpe de soie, with the overgown of tulle worked in threads of gold that May had chosen and Mrs. Brackley had set the seamstresses to in 3 days of stitching. At her throat lay the Alnwick parure that had not been unlocked from its case since Isolde had worn it, amber the color of dark honey, set in old gold, the central stone as broad as a thumbnail. Her gloves were long and cream. Her hair was dressed low and simple, the 2 plain pins replaced by 2 of gold. She descended the staircase slowly, one hand upon the balustrade. Ralph waited at the foot. He did not bow at first. He looked at her, and the long gray eyes that had for 2 years held nothing but the weather held, for one instant, something else. Then he bowed. "Miss Pelham." "Your Grace." He offered his hand. She laid hers in it. He raised her fingers, not quite to his lips, and held them there a moment against his cheek. "Isolde," he said, quietly enough that only she would hear it, "would have blessed this." "I know," Hester said. He led her onto the floor. The 400 guests drew back to the walls without being asked. The Lord Chancellor sat down again beside the fireplace. Lady May, upon her chaise beneath the portrait of Isolde, closed her eyes for the space of one breath, and opened them again shining. The waltz began. They danced. They danced as 2 people dance who have already walked a longer and harder measure together and know the steps of that other measure by heart. His hand rested at her waist without weight. Her hand upon his shoulder did not tremble. She looked up into his face. She did not look away. Somewhere upstairs, in a bedchamber that had been sealed for 2 years, a maid was at that hour opening the shutters of Isolde's old sitting-room upon Mrs. Brackley's quiet order, and the December air was coming in cold and clean over sills that had not felt it since a coffin had left the house. At the far end of the gallery, near the double doors that had closed upon Augusta, a footman set down a tray of hock and stepped back into shadow. The music turned once more upon itself. Ralph bent his head. His mouth came very close to Hester's ear, and what he said then was not spoken loud enough for any second person in the room to hear, and Hester's eyes, which had been steady, filled once with tears and cleared again, and she nodded, and they danced on. 3 months later, in the small chapel at Alnwick, They were married by the vicar who had baptized Lady May. Hester wore the faded jonquil dress under her traveling cloak on the road there, and the saffron gown at the altar, and May carried a single white rose in her lap, because her fingers could no longer hold a bouquet. The banking house prospered. The northern estate at Kilbucho received its exile and kept him. Augusta was heard of, once, in a boarding house in Boulogne, and then not again. Wilbraham sold his commission and vanished into the plantations of Jamaica. In the long gallery at Alnwick, the portrait of Isolde was not taken down. Beside it, in time, was hung another, a young duchess in saffron and gold, painted with her hand resting upon the shoulder of a dark-eyed girl in a chair, and behind them, half turned to the window, the Duke of Alnwick, looking not at the painter but at his wife. It was said, in the county, that Hester Pelham had won a duke. It was not true. She had done a simpler and a rarer thing. On a rainy night in October, in a house grown quiet around its grief, she had been the only one who ever truly saw him, and, being seen in return, had come at last out of the faded jonquil into the light. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Has there ever been a room where you were treated as invisible, the way Hester was treated in her faded jonquil dress, when in truth you saw every page more clearly than the people who owned the ledger? Have you ever waited in silence while someone powerful counted the cost of your dignity, wondering if a single honest witness, one torn scrap of paper, one quiet name spoken aloud, would ever be enough to turn the tide? And when justice finally arrived, did it come from a shouted victory, or from one calm sentence spoken across a boardroom table? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.